And Gloria, we are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Democratic U.S. Senate debate. This program is being presented to you this evening by the DeKalb County Democratic Committee and House District 89. I'm Gloria Moore, and I will be introducing you or recognizing for you 9 other hosts, Democratic organizations that are presenting this event with us. I am the Special Events Chair for DeKalb Democratic Committee and also a member of House District 89 and Greater Atlanta Democratic Women. I'd like to make sure that everyone gets a chance to see all of the fine Democratic organizations who are co-sponsoring this with us this evening. And the first one is DeKalb Democratic Women. And I'd like to make a special shout out to the president of Cobb County Democratic Women, who was a member of our working group putting this debate together. Thank you very much, Chinita Allen. Also, Clayton County Democratic Committee, the DeKalb Young Democrats, the Fayette County Democratic Committee and Fayette County Democratic Women, Greater Atlanta Democratic Women, the Congressional District 4, which is part of the Georgia Democratic Party, the Newton County Democrats, and the Rockdale Democrats. Thank you all for being a part of this and helping us to make this event as available to as many people as possible. Before I introduce our moderators for this evening, I would like to thank all of our audience for being here, as well as our candidates and moderators, because obviously we live in very challenging times right now. The challenge of COVID-19 has us being innovative, but also we have to be flexible and adaptable.
Absolutely.
So again, appreciate that our candidates who are having to campaign in the midst of a pandemic are still finding ways to get their messages out to their voters. And we're wanting to do whatever we can to make sure that that happens. So if you are watching this live on Facebook, please start a watch party, share this event all over Facebook. And if you have questions, put them in the comments. And even though we may not be able to answer them this evening, we will make sure they get to the candidates and their staffs, and hopefully we'll get you some answers to those. But again, thank you for everybody being flexible and adaptable to this environment that we happen to be in. Our moderators this evening are John Jackson. John's the chair of the DeKalb County Democratic Committee. Thank you for being here, John. Cindy Thomas. Cindy Thomas is the president of DeKalb Young Democrats. Thank you, Cindy, for being here. And our lead moderator for this evening is Carly Swift. And Carly is chair of House District 89. And she is going to introduce our candidates. Carly?
Thank you so much, Gloria. And again, good evening. And I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. It looks like we're up to 156 participants, and we hope that that number keeps rising, because this is a great opportunity for you all to learn more about your U.S. Senate candidates. As a reminder, please submit questions in the chat with the hashtag AskGADem And if time permits, we will ask audience questions, or we will make sure that we get those questions to the candidates. So before we get started, just to go over the rules, the candidates have had the opportunity to review the rules prior to the debate. During round one, each candidate has 90 seconds to respond to questions and 30 seconds to respond to any follow-up questions from one of the panelists. Each candidate may choose to challenge a response by another candidate one time with a 30-second comment or question. So let's get started. Each candidate is going to provide a 2-minute opening statement, but before they begin, I'll give a quick introduction of the candidates starting in alphabetical order. First, we have Sarah Riggs Amico. Ms. Amico most recently served as executive chairperson of her family's trucking company, Jack Cooper, and was a Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor of Georgia in 2018. Next, we have Marckeith DeJesus. Mr. DeJesus was raised in Augusta, Georgia, and is a member of the NAACP Atlanta chapter, the Urban League of Atlanta, the Healthcare Financial Management Association, and the American Association of Healthcare Administrative Management, where he currently serves as a co-chair of the Legislative Liaison Committee. I'm going to ask our technical folks, were we able to switch to Mr. DeJesus? Okay, the next candidate is...
Hey, Marckeith, can you please start your video? Let's see, he dropped off his video.
Okay, we'll come back. We want to make sure that you get to see all of the candidates. Next, we have Jon Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff is a Georgia native. He currently serves as the CEO of Insight TWI, a media production company, and was the Democratic nominee in the special election for Georgia's 6th congressional district in 2017. Next up, we have Maya Dillard Smith. Ms. Smith is a civil rights lawyer and organizer. She has served as a legal and political strategist and is a former judge. And finally, we have Teresa Tomlinson. Ms. Tomlinson is also a Georgia native. She is an attorney and the former 2-term mayor of Columbus, Georgia. Before we start the candidate openings, did Mr. DeJesus is his video available? Okay, so we'll just let everyone know that's who you are. Okay, great. So we will begin with opening statements from each candidate in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Mrs. Amico. You're up first.
Thank you very much. You know, today, the United States and the state of Georgia passed some very grim marks in the fight against COVID-19. The nation now has passed the 1 million cases of infection mark, and the state of Georgia has seen over 1,000 deaths. We are facing unprecedented times. And I think before we start tonight, in addition to thanking the DeKalb Young Dems, House District 89, and the DeKalb County Democratic Committee, I'd like to take a moment and just thank all of our essential workers and our frontline healthcare workers for being out there protecting our families. You know, I'm the daughter of a former NICU nurse. My grandmother cleaned hospital rooms until I was in high school and she retired. My uncle and grandfather were truck drivers. My grandmother on my dad's side worked as a grocery store worker. All of these people out there right now are fighting to keep our families safe in some of the worst conditions imaginable. So I want to take a minute to say thank you. My name is Sarah Amico. I am delighted to be with y'all tonight. As the 2018 nominee for Lieutenant Governor, I got to spend a lot of time with the DeKalb County Democratic Committee. And, you know, one of the things I learned is we have an incredible opportunity to build the future of our state. What I saw as the nominee for Lieutenant Governor in 2018, running alongside Stacey Abrams, is that if we go everywhere, even virtually, if we talk to everyone, we take no voter and no vote for granted, we can not only turn this seat blue, I believe we will win 2 United States Senate seats here in Georgia and take control of the Senate with us. I know we're going to have a very tough choice here in this election. There are a lot of good Democrats in our state, but the reality is what I'm coming to this primary with is not only the experience of having won over 1.8 million votes as the Lieutenant Governor nominee, but as a business person for the last 17 years, growing a small business during the Great Recession, fighting to make payroll, understanding what it is to fight for working people, providing 100% fully funded health insurance to thousands of workers and their family, free on-site daycare to employees, and protecting my unions. These are the issues that are going to matter as our country struggles to come out of not just the public health crisis for the coronavirus, but the economic crisis we find ourselves in as well. More than 1 million Georgians have filed jobless claims in the last month. That's more than the entirety of the Great Recession combined. These are dire moments, and working people need a champion who will be fighting for them and their families to not only address the needs of equity, but to change the systemic bias and racism in everything from healthcare to education to
Ms.
criminal
Amico, your
justice
time is-
reform. And that's the kind of champion I want to be in the United States Senate. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next up, we have Marckeith DeJesus.
Well, good evening. Good evening, and thank you to all of the voters who have joined tonight's debate, and many thanks to the DeKalb County Democrats and the co-sponsors for hosting this debate. As previously mentioned, my name is Marckeith DeJesus, and DeJesus spelled D-E-Jesus. You know, when I think about the current temperature in politics, and more specifically within the Republican-controlled Senate, it's proven to be lukewarm and ineffective. David Perdue and the Republican establishment have shown that they cannot be trusted to do what's morally right for the citizens of this country. And not that we need to be reminded, but they showed us exactly who they were and what they stood for when they unanimously voted to acquit President Trump on the charges of obstruction of Congress and the abuse of power. This race is so very important because so much is on the line. So much is at stake. Our democracy, our relationships with our allies, our health care, our safety at home and abroad, and our basic human rights. You know, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm not ashamed to say that I grew up on public assistance. Some may say that where I grew up was the projects, and I'm okay with that too. We weren't poor, or at least I never thought that we were poor, but, you know, because by some standards, we had more than others who were around us. You know, I know what it's like to grow up on public assistance. I know what it's like to have your lights turned off. I know what it's like to have your water turned off. I know what it's like to eat Winnie stew. Basically, it's hot dogs with tomato paste and rice. My mother used to make that for us. But I say all that to say, David Perdue is not relatable. He is not identifiable. He cannot relate with the average everyday Georgian.
Mr. DeJesus, your time has ended. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
You'll have more opportunities to share your positions. We're going to keep it moving. Jon Ossoff, you're up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, DeKalb Dems, for hosting this debate. It's something of a homecoming virtually for me, having grown up in DeKalb County, having served for 5 years on the staff of Congressman Hank Johnson, who represents DeKalb County in the U.S. House of Representatives. So I'm grateful to all of you for enabling voters to participate in democracy, even in these difficult and extraordinary times. And I hope everyone is healthy and everyone's families are healthy. And I echo the praise already made and expressed for all of our healthcare workers and folks who are keeping the country running. I mentioned I had worked in Congressman Johnson's office and had helped serve the state of Georgia in the government in that way. And that experience for me was so disillusioning because I saw up close the corruption and dysfunction and partisanship that have destroyed our political system. The way Congress is bought and paid for by corporate PACs and special interests, distorting public policy. So it doesn't serve the people. It serves those who can afford access to our elected officials. That's why I went into journalism and media production. I run a business now that investigates and exposes political corruption, organized crime, human rights abuses, and war crimes all over the world. And I love doing that work because we hold people accountable when they abuse the public trust and when they abuse their power. And we have in Senator David Perdue, the poster boy for Washington corruption. This is a man who sells access to himself and his home for thousands of dollars in campaign contributions. This is a man who, instead of acting on the evidence of an impending pandemic and preparing his constituents for what was coming, he kept silent, he downplayed the threat, he praised the White House's incompetent response, and he adjusted his stock portfolio to profit from tragedy. That is corruption. That is the caricature of everything that's wrong with our political system right now. And that is exactly why we need to unite to defeat David Perdue in November. And that's why I'm running for the US Senate, because if we don't mount an all-out assault on corruption in our political system, I'm not sure our republic will survive it. Thank you
Mr.
for having me,
Ossoff.
and I look forward to the remainder of the debate.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Maya Dillard Smith.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry about that. I'm so excited and delighted to join you all. I too want to thank the DeKalb County Democrats for organizing this evening and for all of the organizations that have signed on. I've been getting calls from across the state, so I know that folks are watching from every part of our great state. And in this time of moving and adapting the way in which we connect with voters, this platform is important now more than ever. And I thank you too for also being very inclusive. All of us have not been included in many of the candidate forums. And as things heat up in this race, and we're just about 6 weeks out from election day, these kinds of platforms and ensuring a big tent as the Democratic Party suggests itself in representing, I want to thank you, DeKalb, for doing just that. My name is Maya Dillard Smith. I am an attorney, civil rights attorney, economist, and organizer. I am a mother of three. I'm a problem solver, fund developer, strategist. I've managed $1 billion of public-private resources. I've served in every branch of the United States government, and I've served at every level of government. And so I've braided that $1 billion together in complex public finance at the local, state, regional, federal level. As an economist, I understand taxes intimately, and I'm able to construct financial packages that actually leverage and align resources for maximum impact. That's going to be critical now more than ever, as states and localities are now asking the federal government for bailouts. And those aren't bailouts, those are already our taxpayer dollars. This crisis, this COVID crisis, has amplified the already existing structural challenges in our democracy and our economy and in our society. We are seeing the need fully for universal health care, universal child care, universal basic income to sustain one another during these times. We have already witnessed the stealing of resources during the 2008 mortgage meltdown, where corporations got—
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Your time has
Thank
ended.
you.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to Teresa Tomlinson.
Yes, hi, good evening, and thank you to the DeKalb Democrats and to all of the great sponsors that are giving us this opportunity. I was actually born and raised in DeKalb County, went to Chamblee High School, went to Emory University Law School and practiced law, lived in Decatur for several years, and then moved to Columbus, Georgia 25 years ago. I'm the first generation of my family born into the middle class. My family comes from deep South Georgia, where there were a long line of sharecroppers and agricultural day laborers scrapping to get by. But fortunately, my mother worked a union job, and that gave us access to the middle class. And that's how I was able to go to college and law school and be with you here tonight. These are extraordinary times. Just the fact that we can't be in the same room together to talk about this important race tells us that this pandemic has changed our world. And we are the recipients of an amazing legacy handed to us from 2016, 2018, to actually flip a Senate seat statewide to be a Democratic seat. We have a vulnerable incumbent in David Perdue, and we can beat him. We can beat him if we field a candidate who's actually won an election and who's actually governed and governed well. And that candidate is me. I started out my professional career in the federal legal system and the court system, representing people and working with the United States Senate Banking Committee, working with federal agencies to make federal law and regulatory law bend towards justice for the people that I was serving. I took that skill into being the first woman elected mayor 2 times in Columbus, Georgia. I was also public safety director, head of Homeland Security, and I hold a national security clearance with the Department of Defense. So I've actually implemented broad-scale criminal justice reform. I've reformed a public healthcare system. I've saved a public pension. I've reformed a budget. I've reduced crime by 42%.
Congressman, your time has ended. We will come back to everyone. You will have an opportunity to talk to us more about your positions, and we really thank you all for coming. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, please make sure to share this with your friends. We're up to almost 300 participants right now, so thank you all. Okay, so now that the candidates have had an opportunity to introduce themselves, we want to ask some questions of each of the candidates. I will start off with the first question, which is going to be to all of the candidates. So the first question is, the United States has often been called the most deliberative body. However, over the past few years, there has been significant deadlock and partisanship. If you are elected to the US Senate and Democrats do not win a majority, you will have to make compromises to accomplish your legislative goals. Can you give an example of a time when you had to compromise on your position to resolve an issue or reach a goal? And this time we're going to start off with Mr. Ossoff.
Thank you, Carly, for the question. And look, compromise is not a dirty word. And we do need a spirit of collaboration in Congress. And when I served in Congressman Johnson's office, I often worked with Republican colleagues on Republican staffs to get things done for Georgia and to get things done for the country. And I think that we also need to recognize that corruption in our political system is not an issue that afflicts just one party. And if we don't reform our campaign finance system, if we don't overturn a Citizens United decision, if we don't get dark money out of politics, get rid of corporate PACs, reduce individual giving limits, and return power to the people, then making compromises in the public interest is going to be impossible. Because as long as money buys access, as it does to Senator David Perdue, remember, this is a man who literally sells access to himself for campaign cash. As long as money buys access to our politicians, then our politicians will continue to serve the narrow private interests who fund their political campaigns. That's why David Perdue will never take action to ensure every Georgian has health insurance. That's why David Perdue will never take action to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, because he's bought and paid for by the insurance and pharmaceutical industries. And he'll never take action to save our environment, because he's bought and paid for by polluters. So in order for us to be able to reach across the aisle and get things done, we've got to root the deep corruption out of our political system. I expose and investigate corruption for a living, and that's what I'll do representing Georgia in the US Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. So just as a follow-up question, so the question was, can you give an example of a time when you have had to compromise on a position to resolve an issue? And I didn't hear that specific answer, so did you want to give that response? You have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Sure. Well, what I did in Congressman Johnson's office, Carly, is I staffed his assignment on the House Armed Services Committee. And every year, as you know, the committee drafts what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. And there were priorities that I would pursue on Congressman Johnson's behalf, whether it was securing additional funding for historically Black colleges and universities, or helping support efforts to attack the scourge of sexual assault in the military, where working with Republican colleagues was essential. And I'll bring that same spirit to my service in the Senate. I'm willing to work with anybody who wants to achieve results for the people. And I'm not running, Carly, to be a partisan soldier. I'm not running for the glory of the Democratic Party. I'm running to represent and pursue the best interests of the people of Georgia. And that's what I'll do in the Senate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maya Dillard Smith, your response.
Thank you. I am the former head of the ACLU for the great state of Georgia. It is the largest public interest law firm and advocacy organization in America. It has appeared in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, in the U.S. halls of Congress, in the United States Senate, and in state houses across the nation. Compromise is how action gets done, but not compromising principles. As an example, 20 years ago, I was an advisor for the U.S. Census Congressional Monitoring Board. We are in a census year. Once the census is collected, that data will go to the census within the Department of Commerce. There will be a negotiation process between the House of Representatives and the United States Senate to certify the data. That data is used to earmark trillions of dollars of formula-based funding and the 435 seats of the U.S. House of Representatives. I worked under a Democratic president and a Republican-controlled Congress to move the process of statistically adjusting that number to adjust for the historic undercount of communities of colors and immigrant communities. To do that required, one, the knowledge, but two, understanding the impact. As the next United States Senator from Georgia, I intend to represent all of Georgia, regardless of party, class, race, or gender. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to cross the aisle and understand the pain points of all of us. Our households are struggling for affordable housing, healthcare, the ability to take care of transportation, medication. We're making hard decisions. That's all of us.
Ms. Your time has ended, but I also want to make sure that I heard the answer to the question of a time when you had to compromise on a position.
Sure. And so to clarify, when we had to get the Congress to certify the numbers, it required compromise between Republicans and Democrats, and I negotiated those compromises.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Teresa Tomlinson.
Right. Well, I can say almost everything of significance proposed while I was mayor of Columbus, Georgia for 8 years required some compromise. In fact, in some of the most controversial proposals, we in the end were able to receive unanimous consent from our city council, all 10 city councilors, specifically the budget. The mayor proposes the budget. And so never is that budget, although I wish it might have been, accepted wholesale. And there are individual line item negotiations for after school programs. Not everybody believes in the value of those, but I did. And so did the city manager and our staff. And so we worked to make sure that those important investments were palatable to the 10 city councilors. And I found that some of the more controversial things that we implemented, some of the better governing democratic principles that improve the quality of life of our people actually come about when you can phase them in or phase them out, as the case may be, so that people can take it in more bite-sized chunks. You still get your bold ideas through, you still get your better governing principles through, but you do it in a way that's more acceptable to the people who maybe can't get on board with the boldness of your idea initially. Doing something bold over a 3-year period can be just as impactful to the citizens you're serving. And that's the type of leadership I look forward to taking to the United States Senate.
Thank you. Next up, we have Marckeith DeJesus. Mr. DeJesus, I don't think your audio is on. Okay, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Wonderful, thank you. So I was saying that bipartisanship is extremely important. I think that's one of the main issues that we have in DC right now in the House and in the Senate. Republicans want to press their political ideologies, and Democrats, we have our beliefs. And I think in order for us to do what is morally right for not just Georgians, but all Americans, is we have to have an honest conversation about what the needs of the people are versus what the needs of the party would be. So far as have I ever had to compromise? I mean, I work in healthcare. I compromise almost every day. But more specifically, with this COVID-19, the healthcare facility I work for, the emergency department, labor and delivery department, all of inpatient and all of cosmetic surgeries. We've seen so many COVID patients come in through the door, and the facility wants to charge the patients for coming. And from my heart, I can't from the thought of asking a patient who's coming in to get tested because they're afraid, that they may have been infected by this virus. Hey, before they, receive that test. But of course, I had to compromise because that is what the hospital said that we needed to do in order to continue business as normal. So yes, I do believe compromise is necessary, but I don't think that we need to compromise from a Democratic perspective, our beliefs.
Okay, and Mr. DeJesus, so just to clarify, what was the compromise that you are suggesting?
So what I suggested to the administrators was to allow these patients to apply and be approved for financial assistance, so they don't have to come out of their pocket. In most cases, a lot of these people have already been laid off or furloughed from their job. So, I don't think it was necessary to have them or ask them to come in and pay for something when, we're writing off hundreds of thousands of dollars each and every day.
Okay, thank you. So last but certainly not least, Ms. Amico.
Thank you very much. Many of you have heard my story. Our family bought a little business, a trucking company in 2008, right as the Great Recession was starting, with about 120 employees. And we worked really hard, sometimes struggling to make payroll, to grow that business to over 3,000 employees during the Great Recession. And it was a hard fight. I know what it is for the small business owners out there wondering if they're going to make it. These are tough and scary times because I've been there. Unfortunately, our business was caught up last year in the president's trade war and a burgeoning pension crisis for multi-employer pensions in this country. And it required not only compromise, but it required putting together an unprecedented deal in my industry to save those 3,000 jobs. I had to bring together a pension fund, lenders, everyone who was in our capital structure, our equity holders, our board of directors, our unions, the Teamsters and Machinists, and the Central States Pension Fund to try to put together a deal that would protect every one of those 3,000 jobs without a single person taking a wage cut, a healthcare cut, and protecting the pensions and retirement for thousands of workers and retirees. And unfortunately, in our case, it required us to go through a painful restructuring and a bankruptcy process. But by forfeiting my family's equity, 11 years worth of investing in our business, we were able to successfully, in less than 3 months, restructure the company in a way that protected every single job. Without a single wage cut, we are still paying 100% of the health insurance premiums for thousands of workers and their families. We still protected and saved thousands of pensions for our employees and our retirees. But something had to give. And in this case, I was very proud to be able to walk away from my own equity to preserve the economic security and retirement security for thousands of working people and their families.
Thank you. That's great. That was great. Now, the next set of questions will be directed at a particular candidate, and I'm going to bring in my colleagues who are part of the moderating panel, John Jackson and Cindy Thomas. John has the first question for Sarah Riggs Amico, followed by Cindy, who has questions for Marckeith DeJesus and for Jon Ossoff.
Thank you. Sarah, in 2012 and in 2016, you financially donated to 12-term Republican incumbent Jon Ossoff, who has a 100% anti-abortion voting record. Do you consider yourself pro-choice or pro-life? If you consider yourself pro-choice, how do you reconcile your past support of an anti-abortion candidate?
Hi, John. Thank you for the question. First and foremost, I support a person's right to make his or her individual reproductive choices in the privacy of their physician's office. Full stop. Of course, I'm pro-choice. It's the reason I was endorsed by organizations like Georgia's Win List in 2018. It's the reason Stacey Abrams was proud to run on a ticket with me. It's the reason I earned the endorsement of former President Barack Obama. But what I knew of Jon Ossoff, I was the chairman of a large trucking company. In fact, at the time, we were one of the 50 largest trucking companies in America, one of the largest women-owned business enterprises in America. And my responsibility was to my 3,000 employees. I had 2,000 trucks a day on the roads all over this country. And Jon Ossoff, as the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, was working with the Obama administration to pass the FAST Act, which put over $300 billion worth of desperately needed infrastructure investment into America's aging surface transportation infrastructure. In fact, that law was later signed by President Barack Obama. And look, I don't agree with Jon Ossoff's social politics at all, but I want to be clear. As I did then, I will protect the people who are counting on me. And as your United States Senator, I will do that for the people of Georgia. I will sit down with anyone who is willing to honestly come to the table and talk about some badly needed infrastructure investments in this country. It's going to take that kind of ability to sit down and work with people where we can without compromising our values to get this country back on track. So I appreciate the question, John. Thank you.
I understand that you are supported by a lot of pro-choice groups, but I have to rebut and ask, in a time where there are so many abortion bans going on across the country, what will you do to protect a woman's bodily autonomy over her, autonomy over her own body as a United States Senator?
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to say a person's bodily autonomy. I don't want to exclude our trans community on this question either. And I want to be clear. I don't just support a woman's or a person's right to choose. I am going to be a champion for reproductive choice and a champion for reproductive justice in this country. I believe in codifying Roe versus Wade to stop the partisan bickering over our Supreme Court nominees and protect the gains women have made. You know, my grandmother in the 50s almost died because abortion wasn't legal. I am pro-choice. I am the daughter of a NICU nurse. I will not vote to confirm a single judge to the federal judiciary who will not protect the gains we've made since Roe versus Wade. I will also work to fund research into the maternal health crisis for Black women in this country who consistently have a maternal mortality rate that is 3 to 4 times higher than white women. Until we address systemic and institutional level racial bias in our healthcare system, we cannot safely protect the right of reproductive justice and healthcare for all women. That's the kind of senator I'll be.
Thank you.
John, can I ask a clarifying question? Is that possible?
Yes.
That would be up to Carly.
Yes.
Is this a challenge question or just a clarifying question?
However you want to categorize
Sure.
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can ask the question.
Tag on to what John said and to Sarah. Also, Sarah, in 2012, you supported Mitt Romney over the reelection of our first African-American president, Barack Obama. I know I heard you say that Barack Obama endorsed you in 2018. I'm sure you happily received that. But did he know that you had given $750 to Mitt Romney in his reelection bid? And Mitt Romney, of course, is anti-choice. And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
You know, look, I was very proud to earn the endorsement of Barack Obama, and I certainly wouldn't question the credentials of the people on his team who do the vetting for his endorsements. I stood next to the head of NARAL nationally at the Pride Parade in 2018 alongside Stacey Abrams as we fought desperately to change this state and flip it blue. So, I've been very honest with the voters of Georgia. I have not been a lifelong partisan Democrat. Over the years, I've supported candidates from both sides of the aisle, including many Democrats. In fact, many, many more than the Republicans, the two Republicans you've mentioned. So of course I'm pro-choice, but look, the reality is I am in this fight to be a champion for working families. I am here to make sure that the little guy, the working person, is finally at the front of the line in Washington instead of at the back gleaning the fields. And in order to do that, I think we're going to have somebody who's been in the fight, creating the kind of jobs politicians usually only talk about for almost 2 decades. So look, I don't agree with everything in John Micah's policy, but I was grateful for what he did for infrastructure. I will be a fierce champion for reproductive rights in the U.S. Senate.
Thank you so much. Cindy?
Thank you, Carly. This question is for Marckeith. You are one of the lesser known candidates in the Senate race. You've run for 2 state offices in the past, with this being your 3rd run for office. How does your work and life experiences make you the best candidate to represent Georgia as our next U.S. Senator?
Thank you so much for the question. The AJC put a post out back in July of 2019 that said that African Americans will account for more than 80% of the electorate, and that African Americans are key to the Democrats' hopes of flipping David Perdue's seat blue. Yet, African Americans are absent from the race. I view that as, a slap in the face, because every morning that I wake up and I wash my face, I see an African American man that's staring back at me. We all have life lessons that we learn. When I first ran for State House in 2016, I ran for purpose. And I ran because the specific area of District 56, which includes Vine City, English Avenue area west, I felt that they represented well. And I felt new leadership was needed, someone who could actually do more than talk. We find our politicians doing a lot of talking, stating things that they're going to do, and time to get in office, they catch amnesia. And so I felt that was a necessary thing for me to do. In 2017, when I ran for state senate for the vacant seat that Vincent Fort had vacated for Atlanta mayor, at that time, again, that I needed to get into the race because I have a voice.
Mr. DeJesus, your time has ended. Cindy, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. So those are great. That was great info, but why exactly, what in your life and work experience makes you a great candidate for this? Are there any 1, 2, or 3 things that you can point to that just show how you would be a great U.S. Senator for us in Georgia?
Sure. I believe that anyone can be a great candidate and run for any office. And I encourage those who are watching to get more politically involved in their local, state, and federal elections. We need more strong voices out there. Life itself teaches you the necessary lessons that you need in order to be a successful candidate to serve the people. And that's basically what I can say. It's life. Life can teach you better than any book can. Life can teach you better than any policy can, and life can teach you certainly better than any Republican can ever tell you what needs to be done.
Thank you so much. Cindy, your next question for Jon Ossoff.
So, Jon Ossoff, in 2017, you ran for Congress in a special election, and you currently own a production company. As you stated, it focuses on revealing corruption. There are a few, though, that there are questions that come up from voters about your candidacy, such as, why are you running for U.S. Senate rather than a local office like state rep? And how is your experience relevant to the U.S. Senate? Can you name at least 3 different ways your experience makes you the best person to represent Georgia in the U.S. Senate?
Thank you so much for the question, Cindy. And it's true, I don't have a typical political profile. First of all, I'm young, and David Perdue and his allies will no doubt seek to turn my youth against me, but I believe my youth is my greatest strength. And to win these races in November, we need to excite massive youth turnout. And to do that, we need to put some youth on the ballot. And I haven't made my career in elected office. I run a business, as you mentioned, that investigates and exposes political corruption, organized crime, and war crimes all over the world. My team has taken on and exposed ISIS war criminals, human traffickers, high-level corporate abuses, foreign officials who steal US-funded aid and sell it on the black market, and extrajudicial killings by police and security forces. And at a moment in our history where political corruption is destroying our democracy, and at a moment when Georgia is represented by not 1, but 2 United States senators who appear to be using their offices to profit personally, rather than looking out for the interests of ordinary people in their state, I believe that someone with a track record exposing and fighting corruption is exactly what Georgia needs in the United States Senate. So I will apply, yes, my experience in government, as I mentioned, helping serve the people of DeKalb County in the 4th Congressional District in Hank Johnson's office. And most importantly, my years of experience in the private sector, working on efforts to expose corruption and human rights abuses, to shine a light on corruption in American politics, to reform our broken campaign finance system so we can deliver results for the people, so we can ensure everyone has the health care we need, so we can ensure that there's no more price gouging for prescription drugs, so we can save our environment and invest in our infrastructure.
Thank you.
Cindy, do you have any follow-up?
That's all. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay. Turning back over to John Jackson, who has questions for Maya Dillard Smith and for Teresa Tomlinson.
Okay, starting with my question for Maya Dillard Smith. When you became the executive director of the ACLU's Georgia chapter in 2015, you became their youngest executive director in history. In 2016, you reportedly resigned from your position, reportedly in protest of the ACLU's stance on transgender people using bathrooms of the gender they identify with. Have you changed your position on the issue of transgender bathrooms? If it's changed, why? If it hasn't changed, explain to us your position.
Thank you so much, John. I am, in fact, I was the youngest executive director for the ACLU in the country, and at the time, one of only 3 in the leading civil and human rights organization in our nation. ACLU's mission is to defend the rights of all people. I've got more than 20 years of experience working exclusively on behalf of the public's interest. I've served nearly a decade as a judge of judges in the largest law-trained judiciary in the world, investigating, disciplining those judges, including removing them from office. As a United States Senator, one of the primary roles is to affirm appointments to the federal judiciary. I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually done that work before. You've asked me about my departure from the ACLU and my position on transgender bathrooms, and I thank you for the opportunity to set the record straight. My departure from the ACLU had to do with principle and philosophical differences. The ACLU during the mortgage meltdown lost its single largest donor in its history. It had to do layoffs for the first time in 100 years. And it moved to a fundraising model that went after large Democratic donors to say, aren't you disappointed with the Democratic Party? Give us your money. And under a 501c4 political apparatus, the ACLU began to raise money in competition with the Democratic Party, but also to take dollars from Republicans in ways that were not authentic and apparent. So that's number one. We had structural differences, okay? Secondly, I did have lots of questions about the rules that were being rolled out in 2016 as related to bathroom and locker access. Those concerns were not about transgender people in and of themselves. We are all entitled to dignity, to love, and to exist in the world. And I certainly support that. What I had challenges with are two things, Jon, really specifically. When President Obama issued an executive order telling school districts around this nation that they had to allow students to use restrooms and lockers according to their own gender identity, he did so by avoiding a rule that requires notice and comment by the public, by parents, by advocacy organizations for and against. It is part of our rulemaking process. I had challenge with that. I had challenge with HB2 in North Carolina, which passed in a day by a Republican controlled legislature without public comment. We cannot continue to have a democracy that eviscerates the rules and eviscerates due process, period.
Ms. Smith, your time has ended. I'm going to ask Jon, do you want to just follow up so that she can finish her statement? I think you had 2 points and you're on the second point.
Go ahead and finish your points.
Thank you. To that point, one of the concerns is under the ways that the rules were written, even under the Obama guidelines, administrators could not ask questions, they could not differentiate, they could not deal with situations at the school. As a parent, I had a lot of questions, but I was not given the opportunity to ask the questions because my raising just the question about how do we do this and protect the rights of women and girls and also protect the rights of trans people. This is in the public restroom and accommodations context. This is in the school setting. This is in the university setting, right? As a survivor of sexual assault, which happened in a bathroom, I have a lot of questions. Now, a lot of people say, are you saying that trans people are inherently dangerous or predators? Absolutely not. But I am saying that as a biological cis woman, I do have a lot of questions about what it means when we open bathrooms and locker rooms. As a Black woman in Atlanta and in Georgia, I have a lot of concerns around human trafficking and other people who would use loopholes in the law to actually take advantage of folks. And so I just wanted us to be deliberate and thoughtful in the expansion of that right and to do it in a way that could protect biological women and girls and trans people too. And I repeatedly said that. And I think that those are absolute things that have to occur.
Ms. Smith.
In and now.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Jon?
Do you support transgender rights?
I support the rights of all people.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you. So, Jon, next question is for Teresa Tomlinson.
Okay. The USA is the prison capital of the world, with Georgia coming in at 4th in the world, far outranking entire countries like Germany, Iran, Russia, New Zealand, Norway, and Nigeria. Georgia is the home to 26 prison labor work camps. One of them is operated in Columbus, Georgia, where you served as mayor. You have received criticism for your role in the use of labor from those prison work camps to provide city services such as trash collection. Do you support the use of prison work camps? Would you propose to, if so, if not, would you propose to replace or abolish the prison labor work camp model in Georgia and throughout the USA?
Right. Well, Jon, I don't, and that's why I transformed our work camp to a job training and rehabilitation center in Columbus. When I came into office in 2011, and it was heavily covered by the press, anybody can look into it and see. I actually, under the unique authority provided by a mayor who, in a consolidated government, who's the head of both the city and the county, partnered with the Department of Corrections in an investigation that was launched, and I replaced the warden as well as the 2 deputy wardens. And in doing so, we then instituted some enlightened policies to have the most robust GED program in the state, graduated most GED participants in a state work camp. And these are state work camps, by the way. There are, as you said, 27. They're in the metro Atlanta area as well. And so what we did was we instituted soft skills training. Hundreds of our prisoners went through that. We also then partnered through the Mayor's Crime Prevention Office with a program with Columbus Technical College, where prisoners who were working under the tutelage of licensed plumbers, carpenters, electricians could receive certificates of apprenticeship so they could have jobs when they left after their sentence was completed. I banned the box, was one of the first mayors in the region to ban the box, and we began to hire our own prisoners. We also instituted broad criminal justice reform in the jail system, which is a completely separate system as well. The other thing we did, and was quite controversial, but leadership sometimes has to be controversial, is that county governments become dependent on the cost savings of that labor. And so in Columbus, as I talked about all the time, it was that we had anywhere from $15 to $19 million in savings because of that prison labor. So one of the first things I pointed out is we needed broad budget reform. So I raised the fees and restructured the revenue so that we could begin to move ourselves away from our dependency on prison labor. And the reason why is because you have to begin, as I said, either through the court system or either politically. These leftover systems from the turn of the last century are going away. So actually I did the complete antithesis of what was suggested by your question. I removed the dependency, began to remove the dependency of our community on that work camp by restructuring the revenue system and doing budget reform, and then also transformed the prison system to be a job training and rehabilitation center. I will also say I've written papers on this. It's a model that can be replicated throughout Georgia, but throughout the country, and also have spoken to and shown through this model that we need to get rid of the private prison system because it costs our taxpayers $44 a day per prisoner. The public prison system can be converted to a job training rehabilitation center for $22 a day and return value by returning
Ms.
people.
Tomlinson, your time is up. John, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. I have a follow-up question. As a United States Senator, what would you do to reform the prison system?
Yeah, well, you actually can do quite a lot. You can lead through the Justice Department, setting out partnerships and grants. You can outlaw private prisons, for instance, and I think that they are highly problematic, particularly these private prisons that are running labor, as we have seen in some instances, for private institutions and for profit. That is unconstitutional under the 13th Amendment, and it is unfathomable to me it has continued. So we can have federal legislation to make certain that that stops immediately. So as I said, this is a system that we built in Columbus that can be replicated in other communities and can be replicated on the federal level by setting best practices and funding those best practices through grants and partnerships with states and localities.
That challenge, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Teresa, you've spoken eloquently about reforms that you purportedly made as the mayor of this of the city of Columbus. But isn't it true in your last State of the Union address, you actually celebrated and lauded the prison camp labor? You are documented on a video recording telling people that without that $7 million value of the free prison labor, that their garbage bills, which were $17 at the time, would increase. Moreover, as the head of the Director of Public Safety, a young Black girl was taken out of her living situation by police, had a gun held to her head, and you refused to do anything about that under these purported regulations around violence prevention, public safety. You were derelict in your accountability.
Ms. Smith, your time is ending. You have 30 seconds to ask a question.
And about your dereliction of duty to the African-American community in Columbus.
Okay, well, absolutely not. First of all, you've asked a two-part question. You are flatly wrong about that 2-minute and 19-second response. It is actually exactly what I just said about the cost of the prison labor, about how we had to replace it, about why I had raised the garbage rate, and about how what the actual cost of it was and how we needed to continue. We have that excerpt. We'll post it tonight on our social media pages so people can see. And the discussion was about the job training, rehabilitation, and about the reform of the budget so that we could wean ourselves from it. You're absolutely wrong about my leadership related to the African American community in our police department, because we have a CALEA certified police department, one in which people undergo psychological training before they can be given a badge and a gun, one in which they have 40 hours worth of sensitivity training, where we are one of, out of the 20,000 law enforcement agencies in the country, Columbus, Georgia was in the top 160 because they were proactive precisely to the types of things that you are referring to. I was aggressive, as was the chief of police, and every single complaint, such as what you have alluded to, was actually investigated by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, because Columbus has a best practices and very long history of not investigating their own complaints such as that, police shootings and other types of things. We immediately surrender jurisdiction to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation because we hold ourselves to the very highest of standards. There's always going to be controversy related to policing. That's why I held our police officers to the highest of standards. That's why the chief did. And that's why we were pleased to be certified 3 times during my 8 years as a best practices law enforcement agency, particularly related to civil liberties and civil rights of our citizens in a minority majority community.
Thank you, Ms. Tomlinson. Your time has ended. Thank you. So the next section of round 1, we will be asking questions that will be directed at all of the candidates. I'll kick it off with 2 questions. These are questions that several people on our social media page have asked us to ask you all. These are questions that we will ask you to respond with a yes or no answer. That's right. There is no time for rebuttal. It is yes or no. So the first question is, do you support the Green New Deal? Yes or no? We'll start with Maya Dillard Smith.
Yes.
Jon Ossoff. John, while you're working on your sound, I'll go to Teresa Tomlinson.
Yes.
Marckeith DeJesus.
Absolutely. Yes.
Sarah Riggs Amico.
Yes, I support the principles of the Green New Deal.
And Jon Ossoff.
No, I support a historic infrastructure package, but not that specific resolution.
Okay, so no to the Green New Deal. Okay, so yes, we had Maya Dillard Smith, Teresa Tomlinson, Marckeith DeJesus, and Sarah Riggs Amico. And no was Jon Ossoff. Okay, the second question is, do you support Medicare for all? Yes or no? I'm going to flip it. So I'll start with Sarah Riggs Amico.
I support universal coverage, whatever covers everyone.
Marckeith DeJesus.
Yes, I do support Medicare for all, but it's a supplement to the current ACA.
Teresa Tomlinson.
No, I support universal health care.
Jon Ossoff.
No, I support a public option.
Maya Dillard Smith.
Universal health care with a public option.
Okay, so, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maya Dillard Smith and Marckeith DeJesus support Medicare for all. Jon Ossoff, Teresa Tomlinson.
I don't like the term Medicaid for all. I prefer universal health care. There's some limitations to Medicaid for all.
We had no explicit yeses.
So then that's a no, you don't support Medicare for all.
I support universal health care with a single payer option.
Okay, so that's no. So just to go through our responses, it sounds like Marckeith DeJesus is the only one that supports Medicare for all. Everyone else supports some form of universal health care with a public option. Great. Thank you so much. We might have another round of that type of question later in the debate. I'm going to kick it over to Cindy. You're up with the next question, which again is for every candidate to answer.
Thank you, Carly. This topic is about women's rights and the wage gap. One study by the Institute for Women's Policy noted that if we don't take action, it will take 40 plus years for women to reach pay equity in the workplace, and even longer for Black women and Latinx women. If you are elected to the US Senate, would this be a priority for you in your first term? And what will be your plan? We will start with Teresa.
Great, thank you. Yes, this is why I support the Equal Rights Amendment. And I look forward to that being ratified while I'm a United States Senator. And certainly I do support equal pay. Until we have such time as we can have equal pay for equal work, we will not be equal citizens. And so I look forward to providing enhancements to legislation we already have on the book to ensure that. And by the way, I also support increasing the minimum wage and assessing a cost of living adjustment to it. And that includes people who work for below minimum wage and receive tips. We must restructure that system. The majority of those are women, and they're women living at the lower end of our economic scale. And so we must start providing the structural changes we need to lift these women up so that they can live in economic parity and security.
Thank you, Teresa. Next, we'll have Sarah.
Absolutely. I think it's critical that we protect the gains that women have made in our lifetimes, in my mother's lifetime, in my grandmother's lifetime. You know, my husband and I in 2017 participated in the Atlanta Women's March downtown. And one of the most striking scenes were watching multiple generations of families, kids with their parents and grandparents, and the grandmothers who were holding signs that said, "I can't believe I'm still marching for this stuff." You know, I have two daughters, they're 7 and 9. They deserve equal pay for equal worth. They deserve autonomy over their own reproductive health care decisions. They deserve for the Equal Rights Amendment to become the law of the land. And I will fight for these things as a US Senator, but we'll fight for more. It's not just about gender equity. We have got to address systemic racial inequities in our economic opportunity system. Too many people of color are unable to access credit to start a small business. We've seen that up to 90% of women in minority-owned businesses may have been shut out of the Paycheck Protection Program, the Small Business Administration's bailout in the COVID pandemic. That came out in CBS News yesterday. These results are simply unacceptable. We need to fix not only the wage gap, we need to fix the systemic bias by gender and race in our economic system. That's the champion I want to be for your family in the US Senate.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we'll have Marckeith.
Absolutely, yes. You know, one last debate that we did about a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned, actually was with the Fayette County Democratic Party, that there is no scientific evidence that suggests that men are smarter than women. And so if there's evidence that says men are smarter than women, why is it that women are paid, and especially Black women and Latina women are paid much less than their male counterparts with the same educational credentials? We need to have an honest conversation about pay gap disparity. We need to employers from a local, state, federal perspective. We need to amend the the Equal Pay Act of 1963, and we need to support pay transparency. But there is no reason in 2020 that any woman, regardless of her ethnicity, be paid less than her male counterpart with the same educational background. So that is something that I definitely support.
Thank you so much, Marckeith. Now we'll have Jon.
Thank you. Absolutely. I will fight tirelessly for equal pay in the US Senate. And when I was reflecting on the question, I was reflecting on my mother's experience. She came here as an immigrant. and became involved in advocacy for equal rights, for passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, for choice in the 1970s and 1980s. And I recall precisely at the time of the Women's March in 2017 that my mother took me aside and said, I can't believe we're still having to march for this. And it's a travesty that this is even controversial. So yes, equal pay for women. And let's also talk about economic justice and equality of opportunity across racial lines, because here in Georgia, we have one of the most thriving Black middle classes in America. We have some of the most successful Black-owned businesses and Black entrepreneurs in the country. And our senators are not delivering for the African-American community and the African-American business community across this state. We need to have a conversation about more resources for HBCUs. We need to have a conversation about more federal contracting opportunities for Black-owned businesses and true equality of opportunity in the marketplace, not just special handouts and subsidies for David Perdue's political donors and the president's cronies.
Thank you so much, John. And lastly, we'll have Maya.
Thank you. I support broad scale equal pay, and that isn't just about being a woman. I'm the only woman of color in this race. I know fully what it is to be paid less than. But I can tell you that COVID-19 has only amplified the already existing structural challenges in our economy and in our economic system. It requires a wholesale change. That change requires closing the gap in pay between CEOs who get large-scale bailouts and bonuses while we are laying people off with taxpayer dollars, and that wage gap between CEOs and frontline workers. The failure to pay individuals on the front line hazard pay, that's an equal pay issue. They are putting their lives on the line in grocery stores and banks, lobbies, and in places where our essential workers are showing up and they are not getting adequate pay for that. We certainly need to close the wage gap between men and women and between white and people of color. But to do that, we've got to do some structural things that aren't just legislative. They are bottom line, dollar and cents. We've got to structurally change our tax code, because unless families can take more of their money home to take care of their families, and unless we can ensure a living minimum wage that allows us to take care of our basic needs, none of the equal pay discussion is going to fix the problem. We have an Equal Pay Act. It has loopholes that for the last 50 years have allowed for there to be a lack of parity in pay. And the only way to do that is to have a comprehensive overhaul of our wage structure and our labor structure in the United States of America. And as the next United States Senator, I certainly will be fighting for that.
Thank you so much, Maya. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you. John, you're up.
We are in the midst of a national emergency. As of today, COVID-19 has taken over 58,000 American lives. A few days ago, that number was closer to 40,000. We are now surpassing the casualty level of the Vietnam War. We way surpassed 9/11, and we way surpassed Afghanistan and Iraq casualties. So this is a real battle. What has become especially clear are the structural issues embedded in our system that have left disparities in testing and healthcare across communities, whether it's racial or class. And so what are you going to do to fix the disparities in these communities that COVID-19 is revealing? And we will start with Maya Dillard Smith.
Well, as I just stated, this pandemic, which is global, is exacerbating the already existing brokenness of our system. To fix these things, we've got to be square about these things. We are in the midst of earmarking $3 trillion in the matter of 6 weeks. We've already begun to see more of the same, which is big banks, large scale small businesses with employees of 500 people and millions of dollars in revenue got the lion's share of the taxpayers' bailout yet again, the second time in 12 years. We as Democrats have an opportunity to hold the line. I am supportive of the leadership in the United States Senate and the Congress that have been holding the line for frontline workers, for small businesses, micro businesses. As you mentioned, 90% of small businesses are, particularly in Georgia, are led by African-American women that have 1 or 2 employees. Those people were not protected in the Paycheck Protection Program. And in order to deal with these issues, we've got to take a lens that says we've got to put people first. We've got to put the least, the lost, and the left out as the center of orbit for how we are designing policies, right? Ultimately, we're paying for these things. When the homeless and the uninsured show up at our ERs, we're paying for healthcare. We're going to pay for it on the front end with prevention, or we're going to pay at a premium on the back end to treat people with chronic illnesses, right? We certainly in this COVID-19 pandemic have seen disparities in testing because we have an administration that is playing cat and mouse with our lives. We have a governor who opened our state prematurely with less than 1% of our citizens tested. No health experts believe we should be opening up our country, our state, without the infrastructure of testing or protective equipment that so many of us need if we're going back into the workplace, if we're gonna resume our normal day-to-day activities. But I can tell you this, we've not had a time in our generation or in our lifetime where we could reimagine a system and structurally fix it. I am counting on Democrats in Washington right now to hold the line in the next several iterations of these packages to demand structural changes. We are on the cusp of universal basic income, where 6 months ago, we told people they were socialists. They were socialists for providing basic needs for people. These aren't people that are lazy. We are all going to work every day. We are all in this together. And it is incumbent upon us to use the dollars we've already paid into the system to support one another in the rebuilding and recovery of our economy and our healthcare. And we can do that. We have the tools to do that. I'm committed to doing it as your next United States Senator.
Okay, next is Jon Ossoff.
Thank you, John. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about attacking corruption, whether in my business and the work we do exposing corruption or in government, is corruption distorts public policy so that the most vulnerable people are hurt and the best connected people are helped. And what we're seeing right now as this crisis unfolds, both the public health aspect and the economic aspect, is laying bare the deep systemic corruption and the inequitable power structure that has concentrated so much of the help, as Ms. Dillard Smith pointed out, at the very top, and so much of the suffering among working and middle class people and small businesses. We have to break the link between health and wealth in this country. And we're seeing right now during this pandemic, we of course had an underlying healthcare crisis here in Georgia to begin with. 1.4 million people lacking health insurance, among the highest maternal mortality rates in the country. And now that this disease has arrived, of course, it's the Black community and its working class families who suffered because of our state's refusal to expand Medicaid, who are losing their lives disproportionately. And so if we do not ensure that every single American has healthcare at an affordable price, no questions asked, then we will see this repeat, this injustice, this needless suffering will continue. And on the economic side, we've seen trillions of dollars flow to Wall Street and flow to the most powerful and best connected corporations in America. We've seen huge businesses taking advantage of a small business lending program. We've seen the wealthiest people in the country become wealthier, while ordinary people have had to wait weeks or over a month for a single $1,200 check. While small businesses have had such a difficult time accessing emergency relief, we need a
Time's
system
up,
that
John.
provides that emergency help to the people who need it most.
Thank you. Teresa Tomlinson, next.
Yeah, well, as we've seen, John, COVID-19 is a tremendous stressor to our system. And anytime you have a weakness in the infrastructure of your country, any stressor is going to go straight there. And that's what's happened. We have in Georgia 5 of the top 10 counties for per capita deaths related to COVID-19 because we failed to expand Medicaid simply so our Republican leadership could poke a political finger in the eye of President Barack Obama, who came up with the idea. And as a result, citizens have died. Citizens have been denied access to basic health care for so long. Their underlying conditions of diabetes, of heart disease, and so forth made them susceptible to this pandemic. And so what we can do is what I've laid out in my on my policy paper page on my website, a new civic and infrastructure for the 20th, new civic and economic infrastructure for the 21st century. We have systemic biases in our banking system, our housing system, and our tax system, and our unemployment insurance system, and our healthcare system. So we immediately need to expand Medicaid by having the federal government take over the full cost of Medicaid expansion and denying these states the veto right, so that they put their citizens at risk. We, in the wake of COVID-19, are going to need a massive federal retraining system where we can take individuals, some 25 million people now unemployed, and we can retrain them for the healthcare industry because we're going to need them in assisted living facilities, in rural hospitals. There's real opportunity when you have crisis. There's real opportunity to transform your system, and that's exactly what I intend to do. We also can use this horrible time that we are presently going through to invest in a clean new energy infrastructure and create millions of jobs, and millions of jobs is exactly what we need. And so it's when this infrastructure that we're presently living under was created was largely in the mid 20th century. People of color and women were not at the table, and it shows. So it's time for bold thinkers, people who actually get things done, as I have, to come in and start restructuring these systems for our future.
Thank you, Teresa. Sarah Riggs Amico.
Yeah, I want to take a minute. I think this is one of the most important questions we've had all night. In Georgia, over 50% of the deaths have been African Americans, even though they account for only 30% of our state's population. Those are the statistics as of last Friday. So it is impossible to look at those numbers and see anything other than systemic inequities in our healthcare system and in our economic opportunities in this country writ large. You have to think about the economy the way it was before the COVID-19 pandemic. There is no going back. There is only going forward. And if we're smart, we'll take this minute to put the pieces back together in a way that finally creates equal opportunity for everyone in this country, no matter the color of their skin, their gender identity, who they love, how or if they pray, or how much money their folks had. That's the kind of world I want my daughters to grow up in. And to do that, we have a lot of tools in the United States Senate, expanding Medicaid in all 50 states, redefining poverty, which in this country hasn't been done since the 1960s, to expand the universe of families in our state and our nation who qualify for Medicaid, lowering the age of Medicare, to expand healthcare access to people in the sunsets of their careers, bringing competition to the private insurance market, to make sure that my goal and the goal of everyone of good conscience in this country is met. No one should be sick because they are poor, or poor simply because they got sick. This is the moment for us to rebuild that. We are going to have a lot of opportunities to fund federal research to make sure we eliminate racial and gender bias in our healthcare, education, and capital market systems. And one of the ways we can do that is by expanding opportunities and access to capital for women and minority-owned businesses. You know, as a small business owner who grew a company during the Great Recession, I know how hard it is. And I also know that the one thing you need to make that dream of having your own business come true is access to capital, which in this country is not equal, whether it's venture-backed companies giving a microscopic percentage of their funding to women and minority-owned businesses, or whether it's the banking system writ large. Those are
Sarah, your time is ended.
in the U.S. Senate.
Thank you. Our final is Marckeith DeJesus.
Thank you. You know, COVID-19 has exposed some extreme weaknesses in our healthcare. And it has also exposed the lack of leadership coming from Washington, coming from the White House, coming from our governor. I don't think I've learned anything new from Trump's or Kemp's coronavirus. The first thing I believe we need to do is to reinstall the Obama-Biden global health security that Trump dismantled. Had that program been in place during the onset of this virus, we would have seen, I believe, a much less amount of people infected and the amount of people who have sadly passed away from this virus. You know, we need to start asking the healthcare professionals and disease experts for their advice and follow those guidelines. I certainly am not going to follow Donald Trump's advice on sipping on Clorox. You know, I think that was one of the most idiotic things that he could have absolutely said. You know, but this is the type of leadership or lack thereof that we have that's coming out of DC. I believe that we need to immediately put in place multiple testing sites. That's now coming into fruition, but why wasn't that done a month ago? You know, we need to make sure that our skilled nursing facilities, you know, have enough PPE and test kits to minister to their patients and give regular updates to their concerned family members. Listen, we can sit and talk about corruption and all of that other stuff all day long, but corruption and healthcare and what we need to do to fix the healthcare issue is two separate things. The average everyday could care less about all of the corruption that's going on in DC. You know why? Because it's been going on when the country started. And it's going to continue to, sadly.
Thank you, Marckeith. We got to move on to the next round.
Good will always
Thank you, Marckeith. We have one more question in this round. It is going to be a yes or no question because we would like to move to the next round so that you all have the opportunity to ask each other questions. So I'm going to kick it back over to Cindy. Again, this is a yes or no question.
Thank you, Carly. This question is about reparations. On September 10th, 2022, the Israel-Jewish community in Germany signed the reparations agreement for the horrors of the Holocaust. It was enforced just 7 months later, on March 27th, 1953, resulting in a payment of $845 million, the current day equivalent to $8.17 billion. Additional millions have been given throughout the years for the Holocaust, including an additional $88 million in just 2018. Do you believe African Americans should receive reparations from the USA based on over 300 years of enslavement and being the foundation of America's wealth? Yes or no?
Can you let them know what order they're going to go in, Cindy?
First, we'll do Sarah.
Yes, and I would also include Native Americans in those.
Cindy, you're on mute.
Marckeith?
Yes.
Jon?
That's why I support Senator Booker's bill.
Awesome. Maya?
Yes, and Georgia needs to pass a comprehensive Civil Rights Act.
And Teresa?
Yeah, I support the referral of reparations to as House Bill 40 and Senate Bill 1083.
Thank you so much. And if you guys could please on your websites or in Facebook, give the details of what your plan would be for that. Thank you so much, guys.
It already is on ours, Cindy.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, well, that concludes the first portion of our debate. We call that the easy round. Now it's going to get a little bit tougher because the candidates will now have the opportunity to ask one question to one of his or her opponent on a topic of their choosing. Each candidate has 30 seconds to ask the question. The candidate has 90 seconds to respond and 30 seconds for a rebuttal if the moderators allow it. So in random order, Ms. Smith, Maya Dillard Smith, you get the first question. Who would you like to ask a question of?
Well, interesting. I will direct my question to Mr. Ossoff, if that's okay.
Okay, great. Take it away.
Yes, John, campaigning is incredibly hard, and you know full well as a former candidate in a congressional race where Democrats poured nearly $50 million, the most money that Democrats ever spent in a single national congressional election, and you were unsuccessful. What motivated you after losing that race to run for this seat, which is a statewide seat? For many, it feels like the epitome of privilege to fail forward, not dissimilar to Beto in Texas. Can you talk about your calculus in failing forward?
Thank you so much for the question, Maya. And this is a good opportunity, I think, for me to first of all thank everybody who's tuned in right now, who played a part in that historic effort in 2017. When I got in that race 6 weeks beforehand, the incumbent Republican had won by 24%. No one thought Georgia's 6th district could be competitive, let alone winnable. But because of a massive grassroots effort that we built together, raising record sums and average contributions of $21, running the largest volunteer-based field program in the history of US House races to generate the strongest turnout ever in a special election, standalone for the US House. We inspired people across the country, and we forced the President of the United States, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House personally come down to Georgia to defend something that was theirs. And so I'm grateful to everyone who poured so much into that effort, and I look back on that race and I hold my head high. And as for why I'm continuing in this fight and why I believe disengagement is not an option, we have a government right now that is comprehensively failing our citizens. We have in Senator David Perdue, who embodies so much of what is wrong with our political system, a senator who sells access, a senator who ignores evidence, a senator who refuses at every turn to criticize the president because the president's his political patron and from his own political party, a senator who appears to have exploited his position to make money from a pandemic. And so I feel a tremendous motivation and passion to defeat our incumbent Senator David Perdue, who has utterly failed the people of this state, and to go to work delivering health care for every citizen, reducing prescription drug costs, saving our environment, and investing in our infrastructure. Maya, I appreciate the question, and that's what motivates me.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up to that, Maya?
Well, I would just ask on the issue of privilege, how do you deal with the people who think that your ability to do it is because you're a white man, that you can lose such a significant congressional race and then go for a larger race, not unlike Beto in Texas?
Well, as I said, Maya, I look back on that campaign and I hold my head high. And, you know, I view that effort, which involved and included and drew in so many people into the political process for the first time, which was a proof point for people across the country who were despairing after Donald Trump's defeat, that we could fight back and that we could fight back anywhere, as a contribution to the progressive effort and democratic politics in this state. I have no regrets. I'm proud of the campaign. And again, I do appreciate your question.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Amico, you're up. Who would you like to ask a question of?
Thank you. My question is for Marckeith. Marckeith, we've talked a lot about the COVID-19 pandemic tonight and how desperately unequal our healthcare system is by race in this state and in this country. You're the only person in this debate who actually works in our healthcare system, who's one of those frontline healthcare workers. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think Georgia families should know right now about the COVID pandemic and the inequality that it's really exposed in our healthcare system?
Thank you, Sarah, and an excellent question. What I tell anyone is, please, when you go out, please wear gloves. Disinfect handles and doors in your home, on your vehicles, any surface items that you can touch. We've been made aware that lasts up to several hours to a day or so on a contact surface. I think it's so very important that we protect ourselves and we protect our family and our friends from this virus that has taken a hold, not just of America, but from a global perspective. I also believe that we need stronger leadership from a state and federal perspective that would just speak plain to the American people. You know, Georgians and Americans, we've shied away from wanting to be politically engaged, and that's primarily because there's a lot of BS out there. And I'm just going to be very frank. People are tired of getting, you know, the rehearsed answers. They're tired of hearing, you know, candidates' elevator speech. They want to hear you speak naturally from the heart, because that's what matters. So again, for that question, Sarah, and I would tell everyone to please be safe, please be mindful of, you know, when you're traveling outside of your home, and stay that 6 feet distance from others.
Thank you so much, Marckeith. Next up, we have John. John, who would you like to ask a question?
I have a question for Ms. Dillard Smith, please, Carly.
Okay, take it away.
So we have on this stage, Ms. Dillard Smith, an array of experience and talent, and you are a distinguished attorney. You're someone who has a track record fighting for civil rights and civil liberties. You led the Georgia chapter of the ACLU. And I think we probably all agree tonight that criminal justice reform has become a top priority in the Democratic Party, in large part because of the efforts of activists like you, who have held candidates and politicians and elected officials accountable. So I want to take this opportunity, if I might, to ask you if you could lay out for all the folks who are listening at home tonight what you believe the most essential priorities for criminal justice reform will be for the next Congress and the next Democratic administration. Thank you.
Sure. This current White House administration passed the First Step Act several months ago. The first step to addressing criminal justice reform at the federal level comprehensively. It's a start, but it certainly doesn't go far enough. First and foremost, we've got to do away completely with mandatory minimum sentences, which were put in place during the war on drugs and the disproportionate use of law to deal with crack and powder cocaine, which was a direct racial tactic that led to the mass incarceration of millions of Black and brown men and women in this country. We also have to do away with the cash bail system. It is crippling our justice system. It is denying people their due process rights. More than 90% of cases never go to a jury or to a judge. They are pleaded out with kind of overzealous district attorney and attorney generals doling out and hanging over the heads of young people who are making mistakes in many instances, years and years depriving communities, largely African-American and Latino communities, of vibrant individuals who are tax-paying members of the community. And we're certainly seeing across the country a resurgence of criminal justice reform that is reallocating money from law enforcement and investing it directly in job training programs, soft skills development, housing and education. We've got to do away with the laws that prevent the formerly incarcerated from accessing housing benefits, education subsidies like the Pell Grant, doing away with kind of the draconian things that take away rights forever and ever after someone has served their debt to society. We're seeing states around the country.
Ms. Smith, I'll let you finish up your thought, but you're over time.
Thank you. Just really quickly, we've seen states expand the voting right and re-engage the formerly incarcerated in their franchise rights. And certainly those are things that we have to do to get people their dignity back and to get them back as contributing members of our society.
Thank you so much. Next up, and the last candidate is Teresa Tomlinson. Who would you like to ask a question of?
Sure, I'll ask Jon.
Okay.
All right. Jon, your platform is corruption. For 16 years, I worked in the court system with the U.S. Senate and with federal agencies, bringing corrupt wrongdoers to justice. I fought chemical companies, drug companies, all predatory lenders, and then was elected and broke up the good old boy system. Given all that, do you still believe that you are the most experienced candidate as a documentary film producer and an unsuccessful congressional candidate, the most experienced candidate able to break up corruption in Washington, D.C.?
Thank you so much for the question, Teresa, and I want to commend you on that work that you've done in the court system. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that I've done leading this company for the last 7 or 8 years, and I appreciate any opportunity to showcase it. My team and I have undertaken complex and sensitive and high-risk investigations of corruption, organized crime, and war crimes around the world. Some members of my team have paid a heavy price for that work, but we persist in doing it because now more than ever, not just here in the United States, but globally, we need to expose and root out corruption. And Mr. DeJesus, you were commenting earlier on whether corruption's relevant to everyday life. And Teresa, in response to your question as well, I think what I would offer in response to that is that when Georgians go to the pharmacy and they pay exorbitant costs for prescription drugs, when polluters destroy our clean air and clean water with reckless abandon and regulators in Congress do nothing to stop it, when someone like David Perdue votes to throw tens of millions of people off their health insurance while he's taking thousands of dollars from industry lobbyists and corporate PACs, that is how corruption impacts our daily lives. So Teresa, I appreciate the question, and I do appreciate your work exposing corruption in your career, and look forward to working with you to continue that effort.
Thank you, Jon. I unintentionally, I believe, skipped Marckeith. Marckeith, did you have the opportunity to ask a candidate a question?
Yes, I would like to pose my question to Mr. Ossoff.
Okay.
Mr. Ossoff, what makes you the best candidate, the voice for the American?
Thank you, Mr. DeJesus. Look, voters are going to have a very clear choice in November. I expose corruption for a living, Marckeith, and David Perdue sells access to himself for campaign cash. I'm not taking contributions from corporate PACs like many of us at this debate, and David Perdue has taken millions from corporate PACs. I will defend Roe v. Wade and the privacy of women's reproductive health care. David Perdue believes he belongs in the exam room with Georgia's women making healthcare decisions for them. I learned at the feet of Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights legend, and David Perdue makes excuses for Brian Kemp's voter suppression. David Perdue calls himself an outsider, but he's suspected of insider trading. So, Mr. DeJesus, I think it could not be any clearer that our incumbent Republican Senator David Perdue has failed the people of this state, and I look forward to working with you to defeat him in November.
Thank you to all the candidates. That was an excellent round. I think there were a lot of questions that folks who are watching the debate wanted to have answered. So with that said, we're coming to the end of our debate. It's now time for closing statements from our candidates. And so this time we're gonna go in reverse alphabetical order. I'm gonna list the order and I think you guys can follow it. So after one person's finished, the next person will start. We will start with Teresa Tomlinson and then move to Maya Dillard Smith. Next will be Jon Ossoff, Marckeith DeJesus, and then the final candidate will be Sarah Riggs Amico. So just a reverse alphabetical order. Ms. Tomlinson.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. As the two-term mayor of Columbus, Georgia, I had the opportunity to lead an African-American majority community. I was twice elected with well over 60% of the vote. The second time, carrying African-American precincts with over 80%. That would not have happened if I didn't deliver good government for all people and be a respectful leader. I look forward to bringing that to the United States Senate because we're in desperate need of it. These are serious times for serious leaders. Democrats know how important this election is. There is one candidate who has the experience, the stature, and the tested capability to beat David Perdue, and that is me. Any one of these great candidates you have heard from today could win a Democratic primary under the right circumstances, but only one can win a general election and carry the Democrats from all around this state to deliver us a Democratic Senate seat, and that is me. And so we need to ask ourselves a very serious question here as Democrats. Are we ready to win? Because if so, we need to vote like it. And we need to elect the very best Democratic nominee with the experience to go toe-to-toe with an incumbent and say, I know what good government looks like because I've delivered it to the people I have served, and you, sir, have failed us. That's what this election will be about. Vote for Teresa Tomlinson. I will be honored to have your vote, and I will be a steward for better government for your life.
Our nation is under siege and our democracy is under assault. COVID-19 has exposed the already broken infrastructure of our democracy and our economy. I have dedicated my career for 20 years to working on the public interest and for the public good. I'm the mom of three. I'm a civil rights lawyer, I'm an economist, and I'm an organizer, but I was a teen mom who worked her way through college and grad school at Harvard University. As a single mom of three, I went to law school. I served as a judge for 10 years. I've managed $1 billion. I know governance. I reduced budgets and did massive budget cuts during hard, difficult economic times and did so to sustain resources for working and middle-class families. I've been in the trenches, from the grassroots to the grass tops, from the block to the boardroom. I have organized localities, municipalities, states, and in the federal government. We need leadership now more than ever, who understands how to leverage the resources, the law, and the legislation to deliver real results. More of the same is insanity, and we need courageous leadership in these times who understand how to get the job done. I'm not interested in a politician, and I certainly don't want to serve you longer than necessary. I'm not interested in being in Washington for a title or to sit there for 30 years. We need action now. Everything is at stake in elections 2020. I am the only candidate who can beat David Perdue, and it is imperative on June 9th that you cast a vote, and a vote by mail ballot that will actually deliver a strong candidate to go up against a Republican incumbent in November on Super Tuesday. I am that candidate. I am asking for your support, not because I am African American, but because I can deliver results. I have a track record of delivering results, and I'll certainly be an accessible senator for each and every one of you. You can find out more information at mayaforgeorgia.com. Thank you all for having me this evening.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you to all my fellow candidates. Thank you to the DeKalb Dems, DeKalb Young Dems, House District 89 for putting on this fantastic debate and for giving voters access to candidates, even while so many of us are remaining at home. Thank you again to all of our healthcare workers and to everyone who's out there right now doing essential work, keeping the country open. These are truly extraordinary, difficult, perilous times for the country. And we are seeing right now up close the real human consequences of government that is negligent, government that is incompetent, government that is corrupt, of elected officials who disregard science and ignore evidence, of decisions made for decades by elected officials that have weakened our society, weakened the health state of our people, made us more vulnerable to a crisis like this and less resilient. And right now, we need to redouble our commitment to building an America that is resilient, to building an America that can adapt to something like COVID-19 successfully, to returning to a state of being in this country that's world leading and that we're proud of. Our Senator, David Perdue, has failed us. He must be defeated in November. And so I just want to close by reminding everyone that the struggle for voting rights here in Georgia remains vital. And for us to prevail in November, we have to redouble our commitments to the defense of the franchise for every single Georgian. And whether you support me in this primary or not, right now my team and I are reaching out to thousands of voters every day to make sure they can check their registration status, to make sure they know how to vote by mail. And I humbly ask you to join us in that effort to defend the right to vote and increase voter turnout here in these uncertain and difficult times. And you can sign up to do so at electjon.com, electjon.com. Thank you again for the hospitality and the forum.
Once again, thank you to the DeKalb County Democratic Party and all of the co-sponsors, all of my Democratic colleagues. I wish each of you well and safe. I also want to thank our healthcare workers, but more specifically our CNA workers, our lab technician, our technology technician. Oftentimes through the COVID-19 process, we hear people say, we don't thank the doctors, thank the nurses, but we forget about those CNA workers who oftentimes go into these rooms and patients over to, they don't get bed sores or, do whatever in that patient's room. I believe that every this call will unanimously agree that David Perdue is bad for Georgians. I think we'll all agree that David is bad for women's rights, for civil rights, for health care, and pretty much he's just overall unfit to serve. Although David holds the title as the United States Senator from Georgia, David Perdue doesn't represent the values of Georgians. You see, the problem that we have in America today isn't immigration or health care. It isn't even the political due process, but it's the Republican politicians behind the Republican politics, politicking over things you and I see as common sense. If common sense was actually common, our Republican brothers and sisters would agree that health care is a human right and that every single American deserves access to affordable health care, even our immigrant brothers and sisters who are living here. If common sense was actually common, Republicans wouldn't deny the existence of climate change. If common sense was so common, Democrats would not have to fight year after year to make the Republicans see that gun safety is a national issue and that we must restrict access to certain weapons like the AR-15. If we want to change the trajectory of our state and our nation, we must change the current leadership and hold our elected officials accountable for their actions and their inactions. Listen, this election is not going to be won by name recognition or by how many endorsements you've received or how much money you've raised. I can certainly tell you David Perdue is concerned or worried about facing any of my Democratic colleagues. but I promise you, he is extremely nervous about facing an African-American Democratic nominee because he knows that the African-American vote will make up more than 80% of the electorate. David knows the power of the African-American vote, and he understands that African-Americans are the golden key to flipping Georgia's Senate seat blue. Again, my name is Marckeith DeJesus, and that is spelled DeJesus. I do ask that you will give me your support and your faith that when you elect the first African-American United States Senator from Georgia, you will have an advocate in your back pocket. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everybody for taking the time to be here tonight. The stakes couldn't be higher in this election. We have the opportunity not only to flip this seat, but to flip 2 United States Senate seats and control of the US Senate with it, taking the gavel away from Mitch McConnell and sending him and David Perdue into retirement. So the question you're going to have to ask between now and June 9th is, who is the candidate best suited to fight for your family in this environment? Am I experienced? Absolutely. For the last 17 years, I have saved and created thousands of jobs, good jobs, the kind that pay 100% health insurance premiums for working families. I've put in my own money during tough economic times to save jobs, healthcare, pensions, and to protect the little guy, the working family, the people who need to be for once at the front of the line in our public policy and not an afterthought. Am I viable? Absolutely. As the 2018 nominee for Lieutenant Governor, I got to travel through more than 150 Georgia counties. I got to run with Stacey Abrams. I was endorsed by former President Barack Obama, and I earned over 1.8 million votes, more than any Democrat running for Lieutenant Governor in our state's history, and almost 500,000 more votes than David Perdue has ever won. But let me tell you what I think this election is about. It's not about our credentials. It's about the moment we're living in together. Right now, there are families lining up before daybreak all over Georgia for food bank assistance. There are families worried they're going to lose their homes. There are families who don't have access to health care, who are sick because they're poor and poor because they're sick. Our economy right now is broken. And we are going to need a champion in the US Senate next year to fight to put the pieces back together in the right order so that you and your family come first. Not special interests, not GOP donors, but you and your family. And yes, Stacey and I had the opportunity to win that election in 2018 stolen for us. And Lord knows I wish we had a Governor Abrams right now. But despite that, I'm going to let the experience strengthen my resolve to fight for your family and you and your right to vote, to secure our federal elections as a United States Senator, to be a champion for voting rights and restoring the Voting Rights Act. We can build on the foundation we put together in 2018 and finally have an economy that works for everyone, address systemic racial inequities in our system in everything from criminal justice to education to healthcare. And if we miss this moment, it'll be like the movie Groundhog Day. We will keep doing the same things and get the same subpar results. So I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for you to join me in being a champion for the kind of world we all want our kids to live in. You can join us on our website at sarahforgeorgia.com, join our conversation on social media, volunteer with us. I don't want to be elevated above anybody. I want to walk right beside you in the fight we all know
your
is
time
right.
has
That's why I'm
ended.
in this race.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to thank all of the candidates for participating tonight. So everyone give yourself a round of applause. We truly appreciate your candor and the opportunity to ask you some hard questions that we think allow the voters to understand and who they should vote for and who they align with. This concludes our debate. We want to remind everyone that the primary is June 9th. Please request your absentee ballot. You should have all received it in the mail. Remember, your vote is your voice, so use it. Please visit www.DeKalbDems.com for more information about the DeKalb Democratic Committee and subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for
Good night.
being here.
Thank you.
Great job.
Everybody did a great job.
Everybody
Thank
did
you
an amazing
so
job.
much.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you all, Gloria and Carly.